What if I told you that one of the most emotional moments in Family Feud history started not with a question or a buzzer, but with a single sentence about a hospital room? Welcome to Harvey's Highlights, where we uncover the stories that go beyond the game. Don't forget to subscribe and stay with us, because today's story will take you somewhere you've never been before. Inside the heart of a nurse, and the memory that made Steve Harvey stop everything. It was supposed to be a light-hearted episode. Two families, plenty of laughter, and that familiar rhythm of questions and fast answers. The energy was high, the audience buzzing, and Steve was in full form, cracking jokes and keeping everyone loose. On the left side of the stage stood the Reynolds family, a mix of teachers and small-town locals from North Carolina. On the right, the Pierce family, led by a soft-spoken woman in her late 30s named Angela. She wore her nurse's badge proudly on her sleeve, literally. It was pinned to her shirt collar as a quiet reminder of who she was, even off the clock. Steve noticed it right away. "You a nurse?" he asked between rounds. "You saving lives and then coming here trying to win a car? That's some multitasking right there." The crowd laughed, and Angela smiled politely, though there was a weight in her eyes that didn't quite match her smile. The game continued as normal. Quick answers, laughter, applause. But as the show reached a later round, something shifted. The question on the board was meant to be funny, the kind that usually gets playful answers and a few red X's. But when it came to Angela's turn, she hesitated. Steve leaned in, jokingly tapping his note cards. "Come on now, you look like you got one. What's your answer?" Angela exhaled slowly. Her teammates encouraged her, whispering, "Say it, say it." Then she looked up at Steve, her voice quiet but steady. "Room 302, she said. The studio fell still. Steve blinked, unsure if he'd heard correctly. "Wait, what was that?" Angela repeated it. "Room 302. There was something about the way she said it, not as an answer to the game, but as a confession, as if those words carried a story that had been waiting years to be told. Steve didn't say anything right away. He just lowered his cards, his smile fading into a frown of concern and curiosity. "What happened in room 302? He asked softly. The crowd didn't make a sound. Even the cameras seemed to pause, waiting. And then Angela began to tell a story that no one, not even Steve Harvey, was prepared to hear. Angela took a deep breath, her fingers gripping the podium like she needed it to keep her standing. The tension in the studio had shifted completely. Gone was the laughter, replaced by a kind of reverent silence. Even Steve Harvey, who had seen every kind of contestant and every kind of answer, seemed to sense this was different. "It was my first year working nights," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "I was assigned to the medical wing at St. Catherine's Hospital, and room 302 was, well, it was the room nobody wanted." Steve didn't interrupt. He set his cards down and leaned against the podium, listening. The audience watched him, then turned back to Angela. She continued, "Room 302 was where we put patients who didn't have family to visit them. The ones who came in and never really left. It was quiet, always quiet. You'd hear machines humming, sometimes the rain outside. But no voices, no laughter, no one to hold their hands." Her teammates lowered their heads. Some of them already knew this story, but none of them had ever heard her tell it out loud. "One night," Angela said, "we had a patient brought in, an older man, late 70s maybe. No name at first, no ID. Just John Doe. They put him in 302 because there was nowhere else to take him." She paused, eyes distant. "He woke up just once, looked straight at me and asked if I believed people remember kindness. That's all he said. Then he smiled, like he already knew the answer." Steve's expression softened. "And did you?" he asked quietly. Angela nodded. "I didn't know what to say back then. I just held his hand. It was all I could think to do." She swallowed hard before continuing. "I worked that floor for 3 more years. Every time I passed room 302, I'd peek inside, even after he was gone. I started leaving a little flower on the table in that room. Every shift. Not for him exactly, but for anyone who didn't have someone. It became my routine." The audience was silent, the only sound a few faint sniffles from the back row. Steve broke the quiet with a question. Not scripted, not rehearsed. Why did you bring that up here? What made you say room 302 just now? Angela smiled sadly. Because that question you asked, about something that changed your life forever, that was it for me. That room, that man, that moment taught me that kindness doesn't need witnesses. It just needs to exist. Steve's jaw tightened. He looked off camera, then back at Angela. He didn't say another word. Instead, he raised his hand to the producers, the signal to pause filming. The lights dimmed slightly, and the studio stayed completely still. It wasn't a dramatic television moment anymore. It was something human, something sacred. When the cameras stopped rolling, the studio lights dimmed to their standby glow, leaving a soft amber haze over the set. Steve Harvey stepped away from the podium, his usual swagger replaced with something quieter, something deliberate. He didn't go to the producer's table or back to his mark. Instead, he crossed the stage straight toward Angela. The audience stayed seated, hushed but alert, sensing this wasn't a typical commercial break. A few producers leaned forward, waiting for Steve's cue, but he never gave it. He just placed a hand on Angela's shoulder and said, "Let's take a minute." They moved to the side of the stage, just out of the spotlight. Steve wasn't trying to make television anymore. He was trying to make sense of something that had clearly shaken him. "You said that man in room 302 asked if people remember kindness," Steve said quietly. "That stuck with me. You ever figure out why he asked that?" Angela took a slow breath, her eyes glistening under the studio lights. "I think so," she said. "A few weeks after he passed, a letter came for the hospital. No return address. It was short. Just said, 'To whoever sat with me in room 302, thank you for reminding me that people still care.' No name. No signature." Steve blinked, his lips parting slightly. "He wrote to you?" "I don't know," Angela replied. Maybe it was from someone else. But I kept that letter in my locker for 10 years. Every shift, I'd read it before clocking in. It reminded me that what we do matters, even if nobody ever sees it." Steve rubbed the back of his neck, visibly moved. "You know," he said after a long pause, "I've done comedy for decades. I've met presidents, I've messed up beauty pageants, I've seen everything. But what you just said right there, that's the realest thing I've ever heard on this stage." Angela smiled softly. "I didn't mean to stop the show. I just wanted to answer honestly." Steve looked at her with a warmth that wasn't performance. It was understanding. "You didn't stop the show," he said. "You reminded it why it matters." A producer approached tentatively, whispering, "We're ready to roll again whenever you are." Steve didn't move. He glanced toward the audience, then back to Angela. "Not yet," he said. "Give me a second." He turned back to her and asked, "Room 302, does it still exist?" Angela nodded. "It does. I visited once last year. They remodeled the wing, but I still knew the room by heart. Same window, same hum of the machines." She hesitated, then added softly, "Someone had left a flower on the table." Steve exhaled slowly, his eyes lowering. "Some things come full circle," he murmured. "You never know whose kindness echoes." He straightened his jacket, turned toward the cameras, and motioned for the crew. "All right," he said. "We're not restarting from where we left off. We're starting fresh." The studio lights brightened again. But this time, the energy was different. Still, respectful, almost sacred. Steve Harvey walked back to his podium, not as a host trying to make people laugh, but as a man who had just been reminded that every person on that stage carried a story worth stopping for. When the cameras came back on, the air in the studio felt different. It wasn't the nervous excitement of a game show anymore. It was something heavier, something meaningful. The audience sat in silence as Steve Harvey took a slow step toward the center of the stage, still holding the cards he'd been using before everything stopped. He looked down at them for a moment, then placed them gently on the podium and folded his hands. "Before we keep going," he said quietly, "I just want to say something." Every camera in the studio panned toward him. Every crew member froze. What that young lady just said, Steve continued, nodding toward Angela. That was more than an answer to a question. That was a truth. And sometimes, when a truth like that shows up, you don't keep playing like nothing happened. He turned toward Angela's family and then toward the opposing team. We came here today to play for fun. But after hearing about room 302, after hearing what it meant, I think we should do something a little different. Angela looked confused. Steve, you don't have to. He held up a hand gently. I know I don't have to, but I want to. He turned to the crowd. How many of y'all have ever been in a hospital room like that? Visiting someone who didn't have anyone else? Hands started to rise, slowly at first, then all across the room. Yeah, Steve said softly. That's what I thought. He looked back at the two families on stage. Here's what we're gonna do. We're gonna finish this game, but every point that gets scored, every single one, we're gonna turn into something real. The prize money, it's going straight to St. Catherine's Hospital to help the nurses who take care of folks in rooms like 302. That sound good to everybody? The crowd erupted in applause. Both families nodded, many with tears in their eyes. Angela's teammates reached out and held her hands. Steve smiled, but it wasn't his usual showman grin. It was softer, reflective. Because sometimes, he said, Family Feud ain't about who wins. It's about what we walk away with. He picked his cards back up, glanced at the next question, and shook his head. Nah, he said, setting them down again. Let's change it up. Angela laughed through her tears. You're rewriting the show now? Steve nodded. That's right. New question. He turned toward the board. Name something that reminds you life is worth living. The audience gasped quietly. It wasn't the kind of question anyone expected on Family Feud. But it was perfect. Angela hit the buzzer first. Being remembered, she said softly. Steve pointed toward the board. The screen lit up with the words. Being remembered, number 1 answer. The audience cheered, but this time, the applause carried something else. A kind of reverence. It wasn't about winning or losing anymore. It was about being seen. Steve wiped his eyes subtly with a pocket square, then said into his mic, All right, let's keep going. But before we do, Angela, I want you to know something. Room 302's not just a number anymore. Not after today. Angela smiled, the tears finally giving way to a quiet laugh. Thank you, Steve. No, Steve said, shaking his head. Thank you. And then, for the first time that day, the laughter returned, soft, genuine, and healing. The game resumed, but the meaning lingered in the air like something sacred that couldn't quite be put into words. The episode aired 3 weeks later. It wasn't advertised as anything special, just another Family Feud episode on a quiet Thursday evening. But within minutes of airing, it became one of the most talked about moments in the show's history. People didn't tune in to see who won. They tuned in to see why Steve Harvey had stopped the game. Clips of Angela's story spread across social media. The still image of her standing at the podium, tears on her cheeks, and Steve's silent, steady gaze beside her. Viewers called it the episode that felt like church. Within 24 hours, St. Catherine's Hospital began receiving phone calls. Not from reporters, but from strangers, people offering to donate flowers to patients, to volunteer, to send letters to the nurses who worked nights. Room 302, once just another hospital room, became a symbol of unseen kindness. A week later, a package arrived at the Family Feud offices. It was addressed simply to Steve Harvey. Inside was a small, folded piece of paper and a single pressed daisy. The note read, To Mr. Harvey, thank you for giving room 302 a voice. I was one of those patients once. I remember that nurse who used to leave flowers. She reminded me I wasn't forgotten. No signature, no return address, just those words. When Steve finished reading, he didn't speak for a long time. He held the letter, staring at the handwriting like it contained something holy. Then he folded it carefully, slid it into his jacket pocket, and said quietly to his staff, This one's staying with me. During the next taping, he told the crew something they would never forget. Every seat in this studio, he said, every light, every camera. It's all about people, real people, and sometimes A story walks in here that's bigger than laughter, bigger than ratings. Sometimes it's just about reminding folks that kindness doesn't disappear. From that day on, there was a small white flower placed on Steve's podium before every show. He never mentioned it on air, never explained it. But the crew knew. Angela knew. And anyone who had ever seen that episode knew, too. Months later, Angela appeared in a follow-up interview. She spoke about how donations had flooded in for her hospital, enough to fund a new patient support program. They renamed the wing the Room 302 Foundation, dedicated to compassion for those without visitors. When asked what she remembered most about that day on Family Feud, Angela smiled. "It wasn't the cameras," she said. "It was the silence, the moment when everything stopped and people just cared. I think that's what he wanted to protect." And somewhere in Atlanta, before every taping, Steve Harvey still checks his pocket for that folded letter. Still touches the edge of the paper. Still remembers the question that changed everything. Do people remember kindness? The answer, thanks to a nurse, a hospital room, and one moment of truth on live television, was yes. Always yes. What if this story reminded you of someone you've met? A stranger? A nurse? A teacher? Who showed kindness when nobody was watching? Take a second right now to subscribe to Harvey's Highlights for more stories that prove compassion still matters. We'd love to hear from you in the comments below. Have you ever experienced a Room 302 moment? A time when a small act of kindness stayed with you long after it happened? Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. Until next time, remember what Steve said that day on stage. The game can wait. The heart cannot.